Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Today we're going to be exploring some tips and tricks for setting up a real estate listing or any kind of location-based directory using Wix. We're going to talk about how to build the data collection and connect both a list of all the properties and a map that displays multiple listings. We're also going to be exploring some different filters that we can set up using no code and code, for example, filtering by state and selecting a specific property and then focusing in on that property on the map. If you want to learn how to do all that and more, we're about to hop in. But before we do that, I just want to tell you about something that you might not know about on YouTube, and that is the subscribe button. It's right under this video. It's black and round, at least if we're in 2024. And if you click on that button, then two things are going to happen. One is I'm going to be really happy and I'm going to see that people like the channel, they want to continue watching, and I should continue making videos. And the second thing that's going to happen is that you're not going to miss the next week's or the 2 weeks after video that come out every week on Monday. And that might be the video that completely changes your life or at least changes your business by improving your Wix website. So if you don't want to miss out on either of those two things, then you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button below. And if you've done that, then let's get started. On the demonstration today, I am using a blank Wix Studio website. The only thing that I've done is I've created a CMS collection over here in your collections. And you'll see that it's a listings collection, and this is essentially the database of all of our properties. Because what we're going to be doing is creating a real estate listings UI, so both listings that you can see visually as in a list, and we're going to also have a map. And the data behind these listings is over here. And this is just mock data. I asked ChatGPT to make it. So we have like price, bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. Depending on what you're trying to create, whether it's real estate properties or anything else with some kind of location, you can add the field that you need for your specific purposes. One thing that I do want to highlight is regarding this location field, okay? Because you could see here that these locations are written out as plain text, so as you'd expect like an address to be written if you were trying to write out an address for somebody. But actually behind the scenes, these locations are something quite different. So let me just scroll down here to the bottom, and I'm going to add in a new item just to show you what I'm talking about. So here, if I go ahead and I click to enter an address in this location field, which by the way, if I just go over here and show you the type, so the field type here is address type. Okay, it's one of the types that you can select for the data inside of your Wix CMS collections. And what Wix allows you to do from the collection UI is to essentially enter an address. So I can write here, for example, 49 East East 3rd Avenue, and you can see here, not so well, but you can see there's kind of a drop down with several options, and once you click one, it'll put that option over here. But even though here it's written out just like a regular address, if I go ahead and I copy the value of this field, and I go ahead and close this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize the code panel here for a second, just to demonstrate something to you. And if I go ahead and I paste the value that I copied from the CMS, you'll see here that it's actually designed as an object. Okay, so you can see here there's subdivisions, and you can see as well that we have, for example, the latitude and longitude here as well as properties for this location, etc., etc. So even though Wix is displaying this to you in the listings collection or in the address field as kind of a plain text address, essentially behind the scenes, what the data actually is a complex location object. If I head over briefly to the Wix documentation, then here you can see a full guideline for what the structure of an address data type is in Wix. So you'll see we have like formatted, which is just a plain text version, but then we have location, which has latitude and longitude. We have a street address, which has a name and a number, a city, etc. And these need to be formatted in a specific way for Wix to understand them. Why am I telling you this? Because if you have your data in, let's say, a CSV or something like that, and you want to go ahead and upload it to your collection, you're going to have to make sure either that your locations are formatted in that specific way, or you're going to have to enter the locations manually into your data collection. So let me just show you what these locations all look like inside of my CSV. So this is my CSV, and you can see here that the locations are actually formatted in the format that Wix accepts as an address data type. And this was easy for me because I was just using ChatGPT and I told it to create the addresses in this way. But if you have your addresses written out in a different format, then you may need to reformat them either manually, or you can try passing it through some kind of program or AI module to reformat it to these, assuming that you don't want to go ahead and enter a bunch of locations by hand. I mean, if you have maybe 5 or 10 locations, that's fine. But if you have something like 200 locations, that is quite a bit of grunt work. The reason that we need the addresses to be in this format and to be inside of an address field in Wix is because for our implementation, we are going to be using the out-of-the-box Google Maps element that Wix provides. And in order to connect that to data without any code, we're going to need to be using the address data type and field within a Wix CMS collection. Now that we understand the data that's going to power our application, let's go ahead and build out the UI. It's important for me to note that I am using Wix Studio, so if you're using Wix Classic, in terms of functionality, you should be able to achieve everything I'm demonstrating here, whether it's with no code or with the code. That should be pretty much identical. In terms of the usage of elements and what's possible in terms of design, that differs a little bit between the editors, so you might need to play around a bit to achieve something similar to what I'm doing here. So I'm going to try and keep this simple, and I'm just going to go ahead and pick one of the default grid layouts that we have over here. And I'm going to pick this one because that should allow us to have the listings and the map side by side. And over here on top, we'll have an area where we can put stuff like filters in order to filter the listing and whatnot. So what I'm going to do here is on the left side, I'm going to add a repeater, which is going to act as the list, the visual, kind of the list of all the properties. And let's go ahead and look for that. So that would be under Layout Tools, Repeaters. And I'll just add a repeater that looks like this. So it's just a list. And if you want, you can have, multiple boxes side by side or whatnot, but I'm just going to go with this basic option here. And here on the right-hand side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a Wix Google Maps element. So let me just look here for Google Maps. Let me look here for Maps. There we go, Maps. And let's see. So we have a bunch of different options here. I want to pick this one. This is kind of like the default Google Maps kind of coloring. And let's go ahead and I'm going to click this right over here to stretch it so that it fills this entire box right over here. And for this right over here, I'll also go ahead and I'll stretch it out so that our listings are kind of filling the entire box. I'd probably want to put like, if I was focusing on design, I'd may want to put like a space in between these two, but since our focus is going to be mostly on functionality, I'm going to kind of do the design sufficiently and not perfectly. Once we have this set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add inside of our repeater, I'm going to add some text elements to display some of the data from our listings, such as like the price and the location or whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and add in some text. Let me go ahead and I'll just grab one of these paragraphs here. And what I like to do when I'm connecting to data is I like to rename this with kind of the data type that it's going to be displaying inside of curly brackets. Usually I do this when I'm connecting to code, but also when I'm not, I just want to have something so that if for some reason it doesn't display the actual data, it will actually still be something that kind of makes sense. So for example, write something like this, like price. And let's see, what else are we going to want to have here? So let's just drag in the price, put that right over here on the bottom. And let's add like one or two more text fields. Again, you can add as many text fields as you need for the data that you want to display. You can even add in an image and connect it to an image property inside of your collection. I'm really just trying to show the basics here. Let's add in one more here, and let's say that this will be, what else did we have there? I think we had, whoops, accidentally got rid of that. Let's say location. Okay, so location and price, that's what we're going to have here inside of my list. Now that we have our basic layout set up, we are ready to connect to data. So let's start with this list over here. So what I'll do is I will select the repeater, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on this squiggly line between two dots that says connect to CMS when you hover over it. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to, on the right hand side on the panel that opened up, I'm going to click add a data set. And a data set is essentially a bridge between our UI, between the elements on our canvas and data in a CMS collection. And first we need to go ahead and choose a collection. So I only have one collection here, so that's the listings collection, and it's just going to default it to listings dataset. If you want, you can also change the dataset name over here. For me, this is fine, so I'm just going to go ahead and click create. Once our dataset is connected and to the repeater, we have to go ahead and connect each individual element in the repeater to a certain field inside of our collection. So either we can do that over here. So you see there's kind of like a connection summary. Because I'm connected to the repeater, it knows that it has two text elements and I can connect each one. I can also select each individual text element and connect to CMS, just like we did for the repeater. Once I click that, so here I need to decide which field on the right-hand side it's going to connect to. So I'm going to connect this to the location. So this is going to be address. I'm going to select that right over there. And you can see that Wix already knows to display the address in plain text and not in the object format that we had before. So it knows essentially that this is for human eyes to see. Here, in terms of the price, I'm going to connect it to our price field. So that's right over here. I happen to have the price formatted in text. You might have the price in numbers, which might mean that you need to do a little more manipulating in order to display that in a specific way. You can do that using expressions. It's a rather new thing within data sets, and you can look it up. I have another tutorial on that topic as well. Data set, look for data set expressions or something like that. Okay, so now we have our list, and you can see here it's going to show initially something like 12 items. We can change the amount of items that it will show by going to our dataset settings, and then we can change the items per load here if we want. We might also want to add some kind of pagination, okay, so that we can move to the next part of the list if we need to. And essentially what we want to do now is to display the locations that are over here on the left inside of our map, okay, so that they correspond. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect our map to the same exact data set that we connected our list to. So I'm going to go ahead here to connect to data set, and we're going to say that the location connects to address. This is why we needed to have it in an address field. And now, so at the moment, we can't really see anything over here. We see 1, 2 locations. This is a small caveat with regard to using this out-of-the-box Wix Maps element, is that you have to set the zoom at a specific amount, and you can't really control it based on how the locations are spread out. So now it's only showing 2 locations because the zoom if we go over here to the map settings, right over here, then we can see here that the zoom is set to 14. And this is permanent. So if I go ahead and I select 4, for example, then you see it zooms out a lot more. Okay, and now we can see more locations here within the map. If I set the zoom to, let's say, 2, then we can see even more locations. Okay, for some reason it seems like I'm only seeing 5 locations, but it could be that some of them are kind of overlapping. I will note that the user can zoom in and out on the map using the plus and minus button once the site is live. What we're doing now is we're just choosing the default zoom. So let's say I'm going to choose maybe 3. Yeah, something like that. Maybe 4, not 0. Yeah, you kind of have to decide which zoom you want to pick. But basically, that is one caveat of this approach with using the default Google Maps in Wix, is that we don't really have the option to control the zoom based on the certain locations that we connect it to via the data. Before we go ahead and preview this, I want to set up a few more features that we can use with this map. So first of all, let's set up some kind of pagination so that we can move between the different items inside of our list. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in a button. So let's just add this Get Started button. And what I'll do here is you can choose here if you want to have, for example, next and previous, or you can also load more. I'm going to do next and previous. So I'm going to do here next page, let's call it. And what I can do here is I can connect this to the CMS as well and say that the click action here, click action, is next page. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. And what I'll do is I'll create another button just like it, and I'll do for the previous page. Previous page. And I'm just going to change the connection here from next page to previous page right over here. Awesome. And you'll notice that it grayed out automatically. That's because there's no previous page if you're on the first page, which we are on now. But as soon as we start clicking to the next page, then that should become enabled. Let me just do a little stacking here, and hopefully that will prevent any issues from in terms of responsiveness. And let's go ahead and also add in a filter. So I'm going to add in a drop down. And let me go ahead and look for input right over here on the bottom. And then I'm going to look here for drop downs. And I'm going to choose not a date picker. I want a drop down. So I'm going to click this one. Let's say, for example, select a size. And I'm going to put that right over here. And since we're in the no code stage of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I want to connect this to one of our fields inside of the CMS. And I'm going to do that by clicking Connect to CMS. And I'm going to do filter content. So we see we have two options here, collect content or filter content. I'm going to filter content. I'm going to choose the data set, listings data set. And let's take a look and see which fields we can use as the filter. So if we take a look here, we can see that we have the bathrooms, bedrooms, price, square feet, ID, etc. So if I was, for example, to pick, let's say, bathrooms, then this drop down, okay, if we go into preview mode, there we are. Okay, so we're in preview mode. And let's first check out the next page, previous page. So if I go next page, then you'll see that it loaded new properties and also loaded new properties over here in the map. Okay, and if I go next page, and again, it switched it up. Now we have some properties here in San Francisco, etc. And I can go also previous page. Awesome. In terms of the bathroom, so if I go ahead and I open the drop down, you'll see that Wix automatically consolidated essentially all the different options that there are for bathrooms. So even though I have 200 listings in my collection, Wix still only is showing me the 5 different options that we have for bathrooms, which is 1 to 5. So that means all of the listings in my collection have either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 as the number of bathrooms. And then if I select, for example, 3, so it will filter down to show me only listings that have 3 bathrooms. Okay. Let's say now, for example, that we want to connect this to something that's related to our location. Okay, so I want to do some kind of filtering based on location. Let's say filtering based on the state. So here, if we want to stay within the no-code realm, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go to our CMS collection, go to our listings, and we're going to need to create a new field, which will be just for the state. So let's say this will be state, save, and we're going to have to write in the states here. So for example, we have here Florida, and it doesn't matter if you write it in, let's say, the abbreviated version or in the, the full version, but it needs to be the same throughout the entire state field. So if I'm writing Florida, then it has to be Florida for all of them. If I'm writing FL, it has to be FL for all of them. So I went ahead and I wrote out the full state for a few of the listings, not all of them, because I'm not going to do this for 200 listings. And now let's see what the filter looks like if we connect it to our state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just copy paste this filter that we have here for the bathrooms. And let me just drag it to the side. And I'm going to change the connection up here so that instead of filtering content by bathrooms, we're going to filter the content by our state, okay, what we have over here. Awesome. So now that it's filtered by state, if I go here into preview, and I go ahead and I select a state. So here you can see a list of at least the 5 states that I put into the CMS collection at the moment. So if I choose, for example, California, then we have only one listing at the moment that I actually put the state for. And you can see that it comes up here on the map as well. And if I change this, I think Texas had more than one. So Texas, oh no, Texas has one. Where did I have more than one? Florida, I think. Okay, so Florida here has 3. And if I go ahead and I zoom in here, then you can see here all 3 properties that are in Florida. Okay, so that is how we can filter by state. And the filters should be overlapping. So for example, if I select Florida and then I select 3 bathrooms, then it should show me only properties that are both in Florida and have 3 bathrooms. That pretty much wraps up the extent of what we can do in terms of Wix's no-code solutions when we're building a real estate or other location-based listings. What I want to do now is explore a few other features which I think are quite common when it comes to these kind of listing applications that we can achieve with some light coding within Wix's Velo. It's important to note that for the purpose of this tutorial, I've constrained us to using the tools that are within Wix. So for example, the Wix Google Maps element. But depending on your needs for your application, you might also want to explore other third-party solutions such as Mapbox or even integrating the Google API by yourself because it will give you a lot more flexibility and a lot more control over how things are displayed and how the map interacts with your data and with different user actions inside of the application. The first thing I want to tackle is to filter using the locations field itself and not having to build out multiple different fields. Let me just show you what I mean here inside of the collection just to make sure we're on the same page. So remember, if you recall, that in order to filter by state, we had to build out a new state field because we couldn't connect to this location field using Wix datasets. That said, if we are using code, then we don't have to necessarily build out these additional fields, but rather we can utilize all of the data that's in the location field and build our own dropdowns based on that data and filter based on that data using code. So let's hop in and explore what that might look like. So I'm going to utilize one of these drop downs. So let me get rid here of the bathrooms drop down for now. And I'm going to grab this filter by state drop down. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to disconnect it from the CMS here. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select not connected. So now this is disconnected, so it shouldn't be filtering by state anymore. I could even go over here and click change. If that doesn't fully disconnect it, then we can always go ahead and let me just make sure it's disconnected here in preview mode. Yeah, so it's disconnected. You can see here that it says vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, and it doesn't show our states. Okay, so this is completely disconnected now. And the first step here is that I'm going to want to display the states here inside of the dropdown based on the data inside of the location field. So that means we're going to have to get all of the distinct values of the states within the location. So it's a little complex here. So let's go ahead and open up our code panel here. This is where we write Velo code. You can see here that I'm on the home page and I have my onReady function. If you're opening this up at home for the first time, by the way, if you don't have code mode open yet, then you'll want to do that over here on the side panel. So you see here code. Let me just show you what that looks like. So if you click here, start coding, then it'll open up that panel here for you. If you're in Wix Classic, it'll be somewhere up here on top. And here you can see I just have a clean onReady function. You might have some additional commented out lines with just some explanations about how to use Wix code and whatnot. I already got rid of those here. So in order to implement what we're going to be doing, first of all, I'm going to need to import Wix data. And then over here under the onReady, I'm going to create a function. By the way, if anything that I'm doing here within the code seems a bit over your head at any point, you should know that I have more basic and fundamental tutorials about almost every concept that we're going to touch on the channel. So if you're like, what's Wix data? What's a query? If that's like, whoa, where are we? What are we doing? Then just maybe pause the video and take a look at some of the other more basic tutorials on those topics where I really go in depth and explain those for very beginners. So we imported Wix data, and I'm going to create a new function. It's going to be an asynchronous function because we're querying data. And let's call this get states. Okay, so we're going to get the states, and we're not going to have any parameters in this function at the moment. What we're going to be doing in this function is we're going to be doing a data query. So I'm going to say here const listings query results. And we're going to have the await keyword here. That's part of the asynchronous fetching of the data. We're going to have Wix data query. And here we need to put the name of the collection. Sorry, not the name, but rather the ID of the collection. To find that, you can go here to the code panel, databases, and you'll see that this one here in parentheses, that is the collection ID. You can also use this handy copy button just to copy it, and I'm going to paste that right over here. Next, after that, we're going to use a rather rare method on Wix query. So usually here we might have something like find if we want to get all of the items from the collection, but what we want to do is we want to get something called distinct. And distinct will allow us to get all of the distinct values in a certain field. So we're going to need to put in here the name or the ID of the field that we're going to be using distinct on. And since we're trying to get a list of all of the states in the collection, we're going to be using the listing field. So let's go over here and just double check the ID. Sorry, not the listing field, the location field. Okay, so let me go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to put that over here inside of the distinct. Now here is where the magic sauce comes in, because if you remember, this location is actually an object. It's a JavaScript object, and it has lots of properties inside, and specifically we're trying to get the state. So the way that we're going to tap into that is, let's go ahead back to our data types explanation here. And in order to get the state, we're going to have to look for state. I don't see a property here that's called state, but we do have a property here called subdivision. And it says here, address subdivision of a country such as a state or province. So for the US, that would be the state. Okay, we could equally do this for any of the other things here. For example, city, country, postal code, etc. So we could do what I'm about to do for any of those. I'm just currently picking subdivision as an example. So let's head back to the site. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do location dot subdivision. Okay, that will mean that we're going to be doing distinct, not only just for location, but for location dot subdivision, so specifically for the states. After we get back this query result, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to get specifically just the list of those states. So I'm going to say here const states equals to listings query result dot items. So the items that came back, which should just be an array of the subdivisions or states in this case. Next, I'm going to want to assign the value of these states to our dropdown. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to return these states. That's all this function is going to do. It's going to get the list of the states. That's why it's called getStates. Now what I want to do is I want to set up another function that will assign those states to this dropdown. Before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to create a console log here in the onReady. So let's do console.log. And I'm going to log await get states. And I'm just going to change the onReady function to an asynchronous function for now. I'm doing this just to show you what value we're actually going to get here inside of the states. Okay, so let's go over here into preview mode. And if I open this up, so you can see here that we have a list of the states. You can see here that it's not the full names because it's the abbreviations that appear inside of the location object inside of the collection. Okay, so this is how Wix gives it to us. If we wanted, we could create kind of like a map between this to the full names if that's how we want to display it on the site. For now, I'm going to assume that we're just going to display it as is. So in order to do that, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name this dropdown. I'm going to give it an ID. So I'm going to select it. Over here on the right, I'm going to call this the states dropdown. And then I can select that here in my code. So I'm going to create a new function over here. And this is just going to be a regular function. Sorry, this is also going to be an asynchronous function because we need to get the states inside of it. And I'm going to call this function the setup states dropdown function. I'm not going to take any parameters. What it's going to do is it's going to say const states is equal to await get states. So that will give us the list of all the states. And then we're going to need to assign that to the dropdown. So I'm going to select the dropdown, states dropdown dot options equals to states dot map. And I'm going to say that for each state, we are going to have an object which has a label and a value. This is because that's how the options of a dropdown need to be assigned. The label is what we see visually, and the value is what the value of the dropdown input will be when we select an item from the dropdown. So I'm going to say that label should be equal to state, and also the value should be equal to the state. Awesome. Now that we've done that, instead of having this console log here, what I'm going to do instead up here on top is I'm going to say await setup states dropdown. Okay, and now if I go over here into preview mode, then hopefully inside of our states dropdown, we'll have a list of all the states. Okay, so this is how we can get a dropdown with values from within the location field and not have to build out additional fields for each different property of the location field, like state, country, etc. Okay, this is if you can and want to use code. So now that we've built out our dropdown, we need to essentially set this up as a filter. And to set this up as a filter now, we're also going to need to use code because we used code to populate it. So let me go over here to edit site. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build out a filter on the dataset based on the selection from this new states dropdown. Let's hop back into our code panel. And what I'm going to do is under our setup states dropdown function, I'm going to build a new function. And this function is going to be our filter by state function. Okay. And what we're going to do here is we're going to filter all the location properties, all of the listings based on the selection in the states dropdown. And in order to do this, so we're going to need to get the value of the state dropdown. So let's say const state equals to states dropdown dot value. And then we're going to go ahead and build out a filter on the data set that we already connected our listings to. I'll note here that you also can go a step further and instead run a query on the listings collection. So you can completely disconnect your repeater from the data sets and also disconnect the map from the data sets and do this all using Wix data query. I'm choosing to keep the data set connected because I know that it's often easier for people who don't have a lot of experience coding. And I'm assuming that if you have enough experience to use Wix data query, then just that sentence that I said before should be enough to send you in the right direction. If not, feel free to comment below. Maybe we can do a follow-up. But for now, I'm going to stick with the data set. And because we're doing that, I'm going to want to give the data set a distinct ID that we can use in the code. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our data set again. And I'm going to go here to the dataset settings. And you'll notice here that within the dataset settings, we have this dataset ID. So instead of having it just called dataset1, I'm going to have it be called, let's say, listings dataset. And this is the ID that we're going to use in the code to select that dataset. So I'm going to go over here back to our filter by state function. And I'm going to select our listings dataset. And I'm going to say here dot set filter. And this filter is also going to use Wix data, the filter property of Wix data. And then after that, what we need to do is filter by the field essentially that we want to, the field and value that we want to filter by. So I'm going to say here equals, and we can use any of the filters that we can use pretty much in Wix data. And here we're going to need the property name. So the property name here, we're filtering by states, remember? So it's actually going to be the same thing that we put over here inside of our, distinct location.subdivision. So it's going to be the same thing that we have here. Even I'm just going to copy it right over because I know that that works. And I'm going to put that over here inside of the equals. Okay, so that's the field. And we want this field to be equal to the state that we picked in the dropdown. Okay, that's how we're going to set up the filter. And we're going to want to run this filter by state function whenever we select a new option from the dropdown. So that means that here inside of our setup states dropdown function, I'm going to add another event listener to our states dropdown, so on change. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run the filter by state function. Okay, just like that. And I think this is ready for some testing. So let's go ahead and go into our preview mode over here. And let's see. Okay, so at the moment, we see here for multiple states, so we have Florida, Illinois, Florida, California, etc. Let me go ahead and select, for example, Florida from the drop-down. And now you can see here that all the listings are in Florida, and also it's only showing us the locations here in Florida. Okay, right over here. And you can see there are a lot. It just looks like one because it was so zoomed out, but there are quite a few locations there. Okay, so that's working. Let's just do another state. So New York. Awesome, so it's New York, and our map also shifted to focus on New York instead. Okay, so that is an example of how we can set up our filter to be based on the actual location property inside of the collection, as opposed to having to build out additional fields. Now, this helps us not only if we're lazy and we don't want to build out additional fields, but it will also help us if we want to create more nuanced filters. So for example, once I filter down on the state, I want a list, for example, I want a drop down with all of the zip codes within that state. Okay, so if I was to set up states, the filters like we did before, so where we have one filter that's connected with no code to states and one filter that's connected with no code to, let's say, all of the zip codes, that means that regardless of the state that I select, the zip code dropdown will still show all of the zip codes, which is not really such a great user experience. We would want to, let's say, narrow down the zip code so that when I select a specific state, only the zip codes that belong to that state are shown in the dropdown. So that's what we're going to go and explore next. For our zip code filter, I'm also going to use a dropdown. So let me just go ahead and I'll copy the state dropdown and I'll put it right beside it. Go ahead and drag it over. And I'll just change the settings here. So I'll say here, instead of filter by state, we'll do filter by zip code. And here, instead of select state, we'll do select zip code. And what we're going to want to do is, by default, I'm going to have this zip code. Let me just go ahead and stack them right here like that. Okay. I'm going to have this zip code drop down disabled. So you won't be able to select a zip code until you select a state. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up here. Open up the properties and events. And first of all, let me change the ID. So this will be our zip code drop down. And I'm going to uncheck this toggle over here that says enabled, and that means that by default this is going to be disabled, so people won't be able to open the dropdown. And basically what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to use distinct again in order to get all of our zip codes, but we're going to want to filter it also so that the location subdivision matches what we picked in the first dropdown. Okay, I hope that doesn't go over everybody's head just like that. But I think that once we, hop in and start setting up the code, it will be a little more clear. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new function that will be for setting up our, that will be for getting zip code. So instead of get states, we're going to have a get zip code function. So let's go ahead and build that over here on the bottom. So let's do async function get zip codes. And what we'll do here is we can pass in, we could either pass in the state as a parameter, or we can get the state over here using the same method that we used here in the filter by state. Let's just keep it simple. We'll do it the same way, like that. So we'll do const state equals to states dropdown dot value. And because we're only going to be allowing zip code selection after state selection, it's safe to assume here that a state is selected in the dropdown. And once we have that state, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to again run a query. So listings query result. And that's going to be equal to await Wix data dot query. And it's going to be the listings collection. And we're going to say distinct, again, location, but now instead of subdivision, we're going to be doing the zip code. So let's go ahead and see what it is here. So it says the name of the zip code property is postal code. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that. head back over here and do location.postal code. Now we're not done yet, because what this is going to do, it's going to get all of the postal codes in the entire collection, regardless of the state. But we want to refine this and say only postal codes for a specific state. So I'm going to add here, before the distinct, I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to say that the location dot subdivision should be equal to the state. So further refining our query so that it's finding all of the postal codes, all of the unique postal codes for a specific state. It's important to note that by default, Wix data has a certain limit. So I think it's 50. I always get confused if it's 50 or 100. But basically, if you think that there might be more than that amount of postal codes for a specific state, or apply that to your situation using the names of the fields or whatever that you're doing, then you can also add in a new limit. So we could do here like limit, and for example, raise it to 500. You can raise it up to 1,000. If you think there are more than 1,000 unique values, then I would double guess yourself if you actually should be using a drop down here for this filter or whatnot. But also, you'll have to essentially run a few queries one after the other. It's a little above the pay grade of this tutorial. So I'm going to leave it at that and assume that you have under 1,000 options here that you're going to be displaying. So that should get the query result. And the next thing we're going to do is say const zip codes equals to listings query result dot items. And the last thing, again, just like we did before, I'm going to return the zip codes. And now again, this is great practice because we're doing basically the same thing that we did before, but we're going to do a setup zip codes drop down. So I'm going to create another asynchronous function here. And we're going to say setup zip codes drop down. And we're going to select the drop down, zip codes drop down dot options. Before I forget, we have to get the actual options, so that will come the line before this. We'll say here const zip codes equals to await get zip codes, and we're going to say here the options equals to zip codes. I'm going a little fast here because we did this kind of already. Map zip code, and we're going to map that to an object, and the label is going to be zip code, and the value is also going to be zip code. Awesome. That looks great. And the last thing that we're going to do here is, after we've assigned those zip codes to the dropdown, we are going to want to enable it. So zip codes dropdown dot enable. Okay. And that looks pretty good. And we're going to be setting up the zip code dropdown whenever somebody selects from the state dropdown. So here, if we go and look for our setup state dropdown, on change, we run filter by state. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, after filter by state, I'm going to say here await setup zip codes dropdown. And that means I'll need to make this asynchronous. And I don't need to put the async over here for now. This should be fine because we're not actually waiting for anything to do anything after that. Don't want to overcomplicate things, but we don't need a wait over here for now, if I'm not mistaken. So let's go ahead and test this out and see what it looks like. We've worked very hard, so I hope that it looks good. Okay, so let's say, awesome. So let's go ahead and select a state. So I'm going to select here New York. And now you see that the zip code dropdown is enabled, and we only have one zip code here, possibly because that's the only zip code that ChatGPT knows in New York. Let's go ahead though and change the state. So let's say Florida, and we can see here now that it shows us a Florida zip code. And if I go to California, then it shows a California zip code. I guess my mock data wasn't built optimally for this kind of setup, so I should have tried to specify that there should be multiple zip codes within each state, but I think it's safe to assume that if there were multiple zip codes in a specific state, it would show. We could, even if we wanted, we can go in and manipulate the data a little bit to do some testing, but I don't want to play around with that too much. So that's an example of how we can do double layer filters essentially. So a filter whose values are based on the selection from another filter. If you have set up your filters in this way, then it's also very likely that you'll want some kind of clear filter button. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in another button over here. And let's just use this button. I just want it to be a little distinct from the buttons that we have over here. And again, not focusing very much on design here. Everything is kind of like lopsided. But let's just call this clear filters. And I'm going to go ahead and give this an ID. So this will be our clear filters button. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a function over here on the bottom. And it's going to be a regular function, and it's just going to be clear filters. And then all we need to do is, first of all, we're going to want to set our drop-downs. So states dropdown dot options equals null. We're going to set our zip codes dropdown also dot options to be null. And we're going to want to disable our zip code dropdown again, zip code dropdown dot disable. And we're also going to need to clear the actual data filter. So in order to do that, I'm going to do that before I do all the UI changes. I'm going to select our listings dataset dot filter, set filter, sorry. And I'm just going to say Wix data dot filter. And that should, if I'm not mistaken, reset the filter to be nothing essentially. So we're not going to have any filter on our data. And we're going to want to run this function when we when we click on the clear filters button. So I'm just going to put that in the on ready for now. So here, after we set up the states dropdowns, I'm going to select here the clear filters button, and just on click, we're going to run the clear filters function. Again, for many of the things that I'm demonstrating when we get to the code parts of these tutorials, there may be several approaches. And it's very possible that you can even write the code better than I'm writing it here. I'm showing you one direction, I'm giving you food for thought, but it's not like written in stone like this is the way to do this. Like this is a way to do this. So please, I appreciate if people get into that mindset when they're following the tutorials. Let's go ahead and check out preview mode. And let's select a state here, Florida, select a zip code, clear filters, and you can see here that our drop-downs were both cleared and we're seeing multiple states over here. So I'm going to assume that that is working for now. I'm going to show you one last thing which I think can be useful with regard to this kind of setup, and that is if you click on a location inside of the list, we want to somehow highlight or focus on that over here in the map. It's a little complicated because we don't really have many controls in terms of code when it comes to this specific maps element. And I'm just going to repeat kind of the disclaimer that I said before, that depending on the complexity of your setup and what you're trying to achieve, this Wix Maps element, this Google Maps element might not be the right choice for you. I think that if you're not too picky, then you can get a lot out of it. But depending on what you're trying to set up and the investment that you can make in terms of time or money, then it may be worth also customizing this part. Disclaimers aside, let's see how working with the tools that we have within Wix, we can still kind of achieve something like the functionality that I described, and that is to highlight a specific location when you click on that location here inside of the list. So since we don't have control over the zoom when it comes to these maps, what I think could be a possible solution is to essentially have two maps. One map is going to be for displaying multiple locations, and one map will be for displaying a single location. And what we'll do is that when somebody clicks on one of these locations over here, we'll switch to the single location map that's more zoomed in, and we'll show that with the location that they clicked. So let's go ahead and try and implement that. So what I'm going to do here first, I'll just duplicate. First, let me call this let me give it a distinct ID over here. So this will be our multi-location map. And I'm going to go ahead and copy paste that map. So copy paste. And this is going to be our single location map. So I'm going to stretch it out as well. So they're kind of laying on top of each other. And this is going to be our single location map. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to, so what we could do here is we could disconnect from data. Yeah, I'm going to choose to disconnect here from data. So this one is not going to be connected to the data, and we're going to assign the location property using Wix code. It's important to note that when it comes to Google Maps, the Google Maps element, for some reason, Wix set it up so that you can only assign one location via code. So if you're doing multiple locations, you kind of have to use a data set. But if you're doing a single location, then you can do that using code. So, okay, so we have our single location map set up, and I'm gonna make sure to hide it by default. Okay, so that means that the default will be our multi-location map, and then if somebody selects a location, then we'll switch over to our single location map. I also want it to be a little more zoomed in, so let's pick like a zoom of, let's say, 10. Okay, so that's gonna be the zoom for our single location map. Now that we have the map set up, we're ready to start doing some coding. And this coding is going to be pertaining also to this repeater. So let's go ahead and do some naming here for the repeater as well. So I'm going to change the ID of the repeater to be the listings repeater. And I'm going to change, let's say, a specific item inside of the repeater. So instead of being called box 5, let's go ahead and call it listing. Okay, just like that. Now that we have the naming set up for our repeater, we are ready to do some coding. So I'm going to go ahead here to the bottom, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call this function function setup listings repeater. And what we're going to do here, this isn't going to take any parameters, but we're going to use the on item ready for our repeater. So I'm going to just look for our listings repeater, and I'm going to set up the on item ready. That means that this should run anytime a new item is added to the repeater. And if you want to learn more about repeaters, I have a few tutorials, I think, that go in depth about repeaters and what on item ready is and stuff like that. So again, if this is like what's going on here, then maybe pause, check out those tutorials first. But if you understand what's going on, awesome. We're going to select the listing item, and we're going to set up an on-click event specifically for that item. So what's going to happen essentially when somebody clicks on a specific listing. And what we're going to do is we're going to want to assign the location value from that item to our single location map. So let me select our single location map. And I'm going to say that the location value should be equal to item data.location. So the location data from that specific item that was clicked. And we're going to want to not forget to show that. So single location map.show. And we're going to want to hide our multi-location map, just in case. And we're going to run this setup listings repeater function. up here on top inside of our onReady. So here inside of our onReady, let me see where we'll put it. Let's say set up state dropdown. Yeah, we could put it over here on the bottom for now. That's something I might want to clean up later, but for now it should be fine. Awesome. So let's go ahead and see if this is working. So let me go into preview mode. And okay, so now we see many listings. And let's say I click specifically on this listing. So boom, so we switched to our zoomed in map and now it's focusing on this listing. And if I select another listing, then nothing is happening. Okay, that's an important bug to note. So it worked for one listing, but it didn't work for any of the other listings. Let me see if I have any errors over here. I don't see any errors here. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and publish a test site. Whoops. So here inside of the preview dropdown, we have the option to preview as a test site instead of preview in the editor. And sometimes this can make it easier to do some debugging and see if we have any errors in the console log. So I'm going to open up that test site right over here. And let's see. So, okay, there we go. Our locations are loaded. Let me select one of these. That's still working. Let me try another one here, and that's not working. So let me go ahead and open up our console log. Console. Okay, interesting. So I don't see any errors here. So that means that it might be a good idea to try and take a look at our code and see what might not be working. So when a listing is clicked, it should be item data.location. So let me go ahead here and let me add a console log, console.log. Listing, let's say location. And we'll do here list item data dot location. Okay, just to make sure that that is actually working. Let's see, single location map show, multi-location map hide. Okay, let's try and test that out. So I'm going to go ahead and click here again. And now by default, it's going to use my test site instead of the preview mode. You can always switch that back if you need by clicking this drop down and selecting preview and editor. You can kind of toggle between what the default is. So, okay, so we loaded here all the locations. Let me click on one. Ah, interesting. Location. Ah, I missed, did I? Okay, so the location is undefined. So what it was doing here, I see. I didn't even notice. I wasn't even looking. I clicked on Florida and it's showing me Wix office in San Francisco because this is the default location. So like I guess if it doesn't have any location data, then it will show this location. So that means that even the first one wasn't really working. Here, okay, so here location is spelled correctly. Here location, no, but that should be right. That should still be the location. So what I might need to do is take a look at the documentation for the maps. Okay, so now it's the right location. And that's the one that I'm assigning. But for some reason, it's not assigning it to the map. Because this should be in Miami, and here we're in San Francisco. So let me just take a look here. If you click on any element in Wix, and then you click over here, you'll see you have the API reference. And this essentially takes you straight to the documentation for that specific element. So let me go over here and open up the location property. And here we see that sets or gets the location. And let's see here. So description, latitude, longitude. Okay, so this might be the problem that I was trying to assign the data directly, but the data in the collection is structured in a different way than this element expects to get the data. which is interesting because we can connect it via dataset, but I guess Wix does that translation when you do the connection via dataset, and here we need to do it manually. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to have latitude, longitude, description. So we're going to need to set up a map essentially. So let me go here back to Wix Studio. So here, instead of just item data.location, we're going to do item data.location. So essentially what we can do here is instead we're going to assign an object. And let's see here why yeah, so it's missing certain properties. So we're going to have here latitude, and we're going to have longitude, and we're going to have, I think it was description. Okay, so these are the three things that we need to set up here. So latitude we can get from our location data. So it's under location, so it's location dot latitude longitude. And I think that description is optional. So if you don't do description, you should still be fine. Well, let's do here latitude. So this was going to be item data dot location dot latitude. And this is going to be item data dot location dot longitude. And for the description, I'll just use the formatted address. So location dot formatted. I think it's called formatted. Let me just double check here. Formatted. Okay, this is what we're going to be using. Okay, let's try this out now that we've kind of restructured the data. And hopefully this is what Wix is expecting. Awesome. So we have multiple locations. I'm going to click on one. Location, latitude parameter that is passed to the location cannot be undefined. Location, okay. This is where things, so here we have a location property, which is inside of the location field. So we have location dot location essentially. That's where I went wrong here. So here I just did item data dot location, where location in this case is the location field. And then I went directly to latitude. But inside of the location field, we also have a location property within that object. So it needs to be location dot location dot longitude. And this might differ depending on what you call your location field. So I called my location field location. But if you called yours, I don't know, address, for example, then it would be item data dot address dot location dot latitude. So this part always stays the same. This would differ based on what you called your specific field. In retrospect, maybe calling it location wasn't the best idea, but that's what I've done for now. So let's go ahead, and hopefully this is the last test. And for those of you who are new to the channel, I usually try and leave in blunders and bugs like this just for educational purposes. I think it could be very helpful, also because it gives kind of like a deeper understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, and because I think it's likely that you might encounter similar or the same bugs that I do as I'm developing. So I choose to leave it in. I hope it's not too confusing. Let me know in the comments if you like this, if you'd rather not have it in. I'm always curious to get some feedback. But generally what I've understood from now until now is that it's helpful and people like it. So that's why it's still in the tutorial. And let's try this out now. So I'm going to select the location and boom. Okay, so there we go. So now it's going to Miami, and let's select another one from New York. And we're in New York, Miami, Texas. Awesome. So that's working. And what we'd probably want to do in this case is to set up some kind of way for us to go back to the multi-listing map. We could set it up here, for example, inside the clear filters button. You might want to do it separately in your application. You can decide. But what I'll do here is inside of the clear filters function, what I'll do is I will say single list location map dot hide and multi location map .show. That's all we should really need in order to go back to the multi-location map. And if we just go ahead and test that out, I think we can close this for now. I think we're good. And okay, so here we have all of our locations. Select one. And yeah, so we're in Miami. And then if I click clear filters, then we go back to the multi-location map. With that, we are going to wrap up today's tutorial. I am aware that you might have additional features that you want to implement, and my brain is already racing with a bunch more things that could be done here, but I just have to cut it off eventually, and I try to focus on what I think are the core features of building out this kind of UI in Wix. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this every week and not miss it, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.